Hey everyone, my name is Stars and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be diving into how to determine what tools need to be brought with you on your journeys and what should be left behind. But real quick before we dive into that, there are two things I want to mention. Firstly, I want to quickly make a correction to a dire mistake I made in the last video. I completely forgot about cured fish, which is even better than cured meat and would have been our fourth S tier. I have more details down in the description of that video if you want to go check that out. Second, I want to provide you guys with a quick little roadmap of what's to be expected in this series. First, we covered the best standard food items for travel. Now we are covering tools, but what comes next? Well, after this, I'm going to do a quicker little mini episode covering just medicine, firewood, and crafting materials. Then we'll be going into the best recipe-based foods for travel, which will include stuff like a bannock or a pemmican bar. And then we'll be covering weapons, their variants, and how they are best used. That's all I have planned for now, but if we get that far, I'll make sure to let you know if there's any other video ideas I have coming along for this series. Anyways, let's focus back in on the topic for today, tools. I'm going to be covering tools here in sections based on their tool types. There may be some tools in here that are exclusive to Tales from the Far territory, so if that's something you want to stay blind to, here is your spoiler warning. We're going to start with cooking tools, then move on to light source tools, fire starting tools, repair tools, and finally handheld tools. I'm not going to be spending too much time on fishing tools, as other than the fishing tip-up, all fishing tools weigh 0.02 kilos or less, so all I'll say about that is don't haul around tip-ups unless you're heading to a place where you're going to deploy them, and do not carry excessive amounts of lures or fishing lines. The final thing I'll say before getting into the nitty-gritty of it is that some tools should be considered differently in harder difficulties like Interloper or Misery than they should in Stalker or below, but I'll make sure to mention that when we talk about those tools. I'm sure many of you have experienced a scenario like this. My survivor has finished searching Pleasant Valley and setting up a safe house in the farmstead. Now they're going to take a trip to Carter Hydro Dam to find more resources to bring back. They set out from the safe house, reach the dam, and collect all the resources there. But now they are severely encumbered and have to decide whether to leave things behind or make several trips. This scenario can be easily avoided or at least lessened by knowing how to free up as much space as possible before setting out on your expeditions. So let's take a look back in time to our survivor here just before they set out on their journey. As you can see, we have a very, very overprepared survivor here, and their pack is cramped up with all the unnecessary tools that they have with them. So let's go over how to determine what should be brought and what should be left behind. Let's first dive into cooking tools, starting with the can opener. The can opener is pretty simple. It allows you to open cans. But believe it or not, the can opener is not the only tool that lets you open cans. If you have any hatchet or any type of knife, you can also open cans without losing any of their caloric value. So the biggest thing to consider for whether or not you need to bring one is if you're worried about the condition cost it will have to those tools. If you are in a spot where you are absolutely swimming in whetstones and already plan to bring a hatchet or hunting knife with you, you can stow your can opener away in the nearest filing cabinet. But if your survivor's in a place where every single swing of your hatchet needs to be made carefully, then bring a can opener in the event that you need to open some canned food. Next up is the insulated flask. The insulated flask should only be brought with you if you are in a scenario where you desperately need the warming up bonuses during travel. When placing fully warmed up drinks in the insulated flask, they will become cold in 200 in-game minutes, 16.7 real-world minutes without speeding up time, if you're outside, or in 400 in-game minutes, 33.4 real-world minutes, if you're indoors. If you aren't in a spot where you desperately need that extra heat, then you can always leave the insulated flask behind to free up that bit of extra room. Recycled can. This is likely the first item your survivor will receive that will allow them to melt snow, boil water, and cook drinks. The recycled can is fine to be carried so long as you don't have access to a cooking pot or cooking skillet. This is because both the pot and skillet can do everything the recycled can do, but with a greater efficiency and also being able to cook food as well. I generally recommend retiring recycled cans for a better cooking tool as soon as possible, despite the fact that the pot and skillet are a good bit heavier than the recycled can. They are far more versatile tools that will help your survivor be prepared for emergency scenarios than a recycled can would. Speaking of the pot and skillet, let's discuss them next. The cooking pot and cooking skillet are very similar tools. Both tools reduce the time that it takes to melt and boil water, and reduce the time it takes to cook food. They also both weigh 1 kilogram. There are only two key differences between these tools. First, the cooking pot can melt and boil up to 2 liters of water at once, while the skillet can only do 1. Second, they each have their own unique sets of recipes that can be cooked with them. When choosing what tools need to go with you for cooking, you only need to bring either the skillet or the pot, and not both. I would say that unless you have a specific recipe that you need to make with the skillet, the better option is always the cooking pot. This is mainly due to the higher water capacity, and the fact that you can use the cooking pot to make porridge, a very useful food for emergencies if you happen to find running river oats on your journey. Whereas the easiest and simplest skillet recipe, the bannock, requires you to carry or find flour and cooking oil, which is less reliable and a lot more weight for you to carry. So, to recap our cooking tools, if you have a hatchet or a hunting knife that you aren't worried about losing too much condition on, you don't need a can opener. Unless you really need several warming up bonuses in a row, you won't need an insulated flask. And bring a cooking pot with you. If you don't have a cooking pot, bring a skillet. If you don't have either, then bring a recycled can. Now let's apply this to our survivor from before. They have all the cooking tools with them, so we can definitely drop some. They see that they have a hunting knife with good condition, so the can opener won't be necessary. And since they have a cooking pot, the skillet and recycled can be dropped as well. Finally, they don't have an insulated flask, and won't need one because there are plenty of warm places to stop on the route to Carter Dam. By dropping those tools, our survivor has already freed up 1.4 kilograms of room. Moving on to lighting tools. We're going to start with flares. There are two main things to consider when thinking about bringing flares. First, is do you have any other light sources? If you have a storm lantern with plenty of fuel, then you won't need a flare for light. But the other thing to think about is how confident you are in your ability to defend yourself from wolves. If you are bringing a weapon with you that you are confident you can keep wolves at bay with, then you won't need a flare. The key exception to this is if you are an interloper or misery. If you are in a region where you may encounter timber wolves, it's always smart to keep a marine flare or two on your survivor. Even if you have a bow and are confident in your abilities, you never know when things may take a turn for the worse, and even the slightest laceration from a timber wolf could spell your doom. So I would say it's generally wise to carry one or two for emergency situations in those difficulties. Now let's talk about the storm lantern, and everything I say here will also apply to the spelunker's lantern. If you can get your hands on a storm lantern, then it's a necessity for any expedition that involves you going indoors frequently. If you're searching a new region for supplies, for example, but it can almost always be left behind for hunting trips, where you usually have enough moonlight to see at night anyways. Torches. Similarly to flares, these can keep wolves at bay, but they also require the use of a fire starter each time you want to light the torch. Additionally, you can always take a torch from an already lit fire if you're desperate for one. So unless you have absolutely no other means of light or repelling wolves, you should never need to bring a torch with you anywhere, as they are really easy to obtain when needed. Finally, let's talk the flashlight and the miner's flashlight. Let's quickly get the miner's flashlight out of the way here. It weighs 0.25 kilograms more than the regular flashlight, and it does have a larger battery, but I personally have never once found myself in a situation where I even got close to depleting the battery on a regular flashlight. So you should never choose a miner's flashlight over a regular one when heading out on a long trip. That being said, I would scarcely recommend taking a flashlight at all. Their key use is being able to keep aurora predators at bay, but they weigh 1 kilogram, and similarly to flares, if you have the means to defend yourself from wolves with a rifle, revolver, or a bow, you won't need the flashlight because you can use your weapon to kill or scare off a wolf if you need to. Recapping our light tools. A torch should only be brought if you have no other means of light or keeping a wolf at bay. If you have a flare or marine flare, you won't need a torch, but you can also leave those things behind in favor of a storm lantern so long as you have a weapon. And flashlights should be left behind unless you would be unable to deal with or avoid aurora predators without one. Looking again at our survivor from earlier, they have a storm lantern with a good amount of fuel already, and they'll be going to a location that involves being inside a lot, the Carter Dam, which also has very little light inside of it, so they'll be wanting to keep that on them. Additionally, they have a revolver for self-defense, so they can drop all regular flares. They also know there is no risk of timber wolves on the path, so they can drop any marine flares as well. They don't have a flashlight and won't need to worry about bringing one, because they have their revolver, which will be more than enough to fend off aurora wildlife. Knowing to drop those flares has freed up an additional 1.25 kilograms of space for our survivor. On to our fire starting tools. We're going to look at matches, magnifying lens, fire striker, and different types of accelerants. Straight out the gate here, the fire striker is going to be your fire starting baby, weighing as much as a basic pack of matches, increasing your odds for a successful fire start, and a fire starting attempt for each 2% of condition. If you have a fire striker with 30% condition or above, it's the only fire starting tool you will need to bring with you, unless you expect to need to start a crazy amount of fires. You can leave all of your matches behind, as you may have a lot of packs of them, and that does add up. The magnifying lens is a very situational fire starter. Its key use being an infinite use fire starting tool that can be used to start a fire on clear sunny days on Great Bear. It also weighs 0.1 kilo, which is not too costly, as you should never need to bring more than one lens. My recommendation is that you should only bring a magnifying lens if you're running low on fire starters and need to conserve as best you can. Matches are a little bit more complex, as the biggest problem most survivors will have is not whether to bring them, but how many should be brought. There are two types of matches, cardboard and wood. One pack of cardboard matches has 20 matches for a weight of 0.05 kilograms, whereas one pack of wood matches has 12 matches for a weight of 0.1 kilograms while providing a plus 5% fire starting bonus chance. So, wood matches are more likely to start a fire, but they weigh more than cardboard. You should be choosing your matches based on how many fires you expect to need on your trip. If you need fewer fires that have a larger impact, bring wood matches, as they are more likely to give you a successful fire. If you're going to be starting many fires, where you could spend a couple matches getting it going, then bring cardboard matches. But since the difference is 0.05 kilograms per matchbox, it doesn't make a huge difference. What will make a huge difference is how many matches you bring, because although one pack of wood matches weighs a measly 0.1 kilos, you will likely find a lot of them, and all it takes is 5 packs for you to suddenly be devoting 0.5 kilograms to matches. What I have found is that the weight that matches can take up in your survivor's pack can sneak up on you very quickly. So to avoid wasting space, you should only need a single pack of matches for a majority of trips. Whether it be cardboard or wood, leave the rest at your safe house and restock when you return. Now let's talk about accelerants. You only need to bring these with you if you want to be prepared to make an emergency fire. And even then, you should only bring 1 or 2 fires worth of accelerants, unless you're on a mode like Interloper or Misery, and you're in a scenario where you feel like you would need more than that. But for easier difficulties, I would scarcely recommend bringing more than 2. So let's work under the assumption that you are taking 2 fires of accelerant with you. So let's review our options. We have regular accelerant, which is 0.1 kilograms per fire, lantern fuel or a jerry can, which is 0.3 kilograms per fire, and gunpowder, which is 0.1 kilograms per fire. If you were to bring lantern fuel or a jerry can for accelerant, you would be devoting 0.6 kilograms of space for it, which is excessive when you could bring 2 things of regular accelerant for just 0.2 kilos. But what about gunpowder? It's also 0.1 kilogram per fire, so wouldn't that be just as efficient? The answer to that is absolutely not. Unlike regular accelerant, which comes in individual containers that each weigh 0.1 kilogram, gunpowder comes in a large tin that weighs 0.5 kilograms, and it can't be separated out into smaller quantities unless you use some of the gunpowder in it. Additionally, gunpowder is best used for creating new bullets. The only scenario where gunpowder would be good for accelerants is in difficulties without firearms, like Interloper or Misery. Fire starting recap. A decent fire striker is all you need. If you can't find one of those, bring a single pack of your choice of matches and a magnifying lens if you are worried about conserving them. If you choose to bring an accelerant, then bring 2 things of regular accelerant. If you can't do that, then use what I discussed before to determine the next best weight-efficient accelerant that you have access to. For our survivor, we have a lot of matches, a magnifying lens, and 3 things of accelerant. We know we don't need more than 2 accelerants, so they can drop the 3rd pack and check to make sure to drop all other unnecessary accelerants as well. They also now know that they shouldn't expect to need more than 1 pack of matches, so the rest can be dropped. On top of that, they aren't experiencing any scarcity in fire starters, as we can see, so the lens can be left behind as well. Doing all that has freed another 1.2 kilograms of space. Now, let's briefly recover repair tools. First, let's go over the sewing kit, firearm cleaning kit, and whetstone. You should never carry more than 1 of each of these items when traveling, and some can just be left behind entirely. It entirely depends on the condition of the tools you're bringing. If you're bringing a firearm that is low on condition, bring a cleaning kit just in case. If your hatchets or knives are running low, bring a whetstone. If your clothes are getting worn out, bring a sewing kit. And of course, if you take the time to repair all your tools and clothes before leaving, you could leave all those repaired items behind altogether. The other 2 repair tools are the simple tools and quality tools. These are quite hefty tools and are mainly used in crafting or repairing other specific tool items. Because of their high weight cost and their specific usage, you should try to do what you need with them beforehand and leave them behind at your safe house. So let's do that with our survivor. They have far more repair items than is necessary, so we can drop all the extras. Now we check our tools and firearms to see if anything needs repairing. First off, we can see that our storm lantern is low on condition, but storm lanterns don't lose condition while being used and only lose condition during struggles, so they can feel confident in dropping the simple tools. Their hunting knife also has very good condition, so we can drop a whetstone. Their revolver is doing good as well, so no need for a cleaning kit. And finally, all of their clothes are in relatively good condition, but they could get damaged from falls or struggles, so they keep 1 sewing kit just in case. This has saved us another 1.7 kilograms of weight. Alrighty guys, now we're hopping into the really important category, hand tools. Up until now, we have covered ways to shred off tinier little bits of carry weight, but these tools are heavy, and they will make a great impact if you don't leave behind unnecessary tools. We'll first look at knives. The improvised knife, hunting knife, and cougar claw knife. You should only bring 1 knife with you on your journeys, and you should always have one with you. They are extremely effective in struggles and are crucial for harvesting animal carcasses. If you don't have a cougar claw knife or a hunting knife, use an improvised one. But since the improvised knife is slower than the others, always use a cougar knife or a hunting knife if you can. When it comes to deciding between hunting knife and cougar knife, it becomes an issue of preference. The cougar claw knife is better than the hunting knife. Faster harvesting and more damage in struggles, but it weighs 0.1 kilos more than the regular hunting knife. If that's space in your pack that you're willing to sacrifice, then I would say go with the cougar claw. Otherwise, the hunting knife is also very good. Now let's talk hatchets. It is very easy to fall into the trap of bringing your hatchet with you everywhere you go. But being a 1.5 kilogram tool, 1.75 if it's an improvised hatchet, it is definitely worth considering whether or not you should bring it. If you have a regular hatchet, always opt for that one instead of the improvised one, which is slower and weighs 0.25 kilograms more. What I would suggest for determining whether to bring a hatchet is to consider where you're going. Are you going to be outside a lot and may need to collect additional firewood? You may want to bring a hatchet. Are you going into Milton to loot houses? You probably won't be needing a hatchet for that, seeing as there's a lot of warm places to take shelter and a lot of things you could break down with your hands or collect to make fire if you really need it. On top of that, there are other tools that can do the job of a hatchet. Hacksaws, for example, can also break down a lot of things that hatchets do. So if you have a hacksaw that you're bringing for a separate reason, you can leave your hatchet behind with even more confidence. Speaking of the hacksaw, you should only be bringing a hacksaw with you if you intend to harvest scrap metal. If you don't intend to be breaking down metal furniture while you're out, you have little to no reason to take a hacksaw with you, and you can leave it behind. The pry bar is also a fairly situational tool. To determine whether you'll need it, think about whether the place you are headed to will have lockers or locked doors that you want to get into. If you're going into the Mountain Town region, then you'll probably want to bring a pry bar so you can get into the Orca gas station. For situations like that, always bring a pry bar because it is the only tool that can get that done. Finally, the heavy hammer. The name says it all. This puppy weighs a whopping 2 kilograms and should scarcely be in your pack. Its main usage is to craft items at a forge, but it also has some other uses that could warrant you wanting to keep one at your safe house. Here is my suggestion for heavy hammers. You want to set up a system for yourself that results in you having to transport a heavy hammer as little as possible. What this looks like for me is determining what forge across Great Bear will be my go-to forge location. Then, if I have multiple heavy hammers, I will leave one at my safe house and leave another at that forge location, so I won't have to transport one back and forth. If I don't have multiple hammers, I'll keep my heavy hammer at my safe house and only ever transport it for trips that are specifically designated for forging. Alrighty, let's close this out with our final recap. Aim to always keep a knife on you. Decide between hunting knife or cougar knife, and if you don't have either, use an improvised one. Think about your situation and goal to determine if you're going to need a hatchet, opting for the regular hatchet, and if you can't find one, using an improvised one. Only bring a hacksaw when you intend to break down metal furniture. Bring a pry bar if your route contains a lot of locked lockers or doors, and never carry a heavy hammer unless you're headed out to a forge and don't already have the hammer there. Let's see how this affects our survivor. As we can see, they only have one knife, so they're set there. They don't have a hatchet, but won't be needing one, as they aren't going to need it inside the dam and won't be needing firewood because of all the warm locations along their route. They should be keeping their pry bar because of all the lockers that are inside the dam. They don't need to collect scrap metal, so the hacksaw can be dropped, and they aren't heading to a forge, so the heavy hammer can be dropped as well. Doing this has freed us another 3 kilograms, and it could have been 4.5 if they had a hatchet. And finally, let's apply what we learned in our last video to our survivor's food supply. They have a kilo of cooked rabbit on them, so they need to leave that here or eat it before leaving. In this scenario, they eat it before leaving and then drink 2 sodas to refill their hydration. After that, we can see they have several energy bars and salty crackers, and we know from the last video that those are the best foods for travel, so all other food items can be dropped. And look at that, they just freed up another 3.7 kilograms of space from food alone. So after covering all of the tools and applying what we learned from this video and the last, how much room did we free up? We got 1.4 from cooking tools, 1.25 from lighting tools, 1.2 from fire starting tools, 1.7 from repair tools, 3 from handheld tools, and 3.7 from food, saving us a whopping 12.25 kilograms of pack room for our trip. A massive improvement. And that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for the engagement and support in my first video. It was so much more than I expected, and I'm very grateful to all of you, especially those who subscribed. This video is going to be a bit longer, so the next time I see you, we'll do a shorter one where we just go over medicine, firewood, and crafting materials. Shouldn't be more than a couple minutes long. So if you want to know when that's up, make sure to subscribe. As always, if I missed anything or got some details incorrect, please let me know. The integrity of the information I'm giving you guys is incredibly important to me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.